Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming for this panel on leading low-carbon cities. As you can see, I have an incredibly impressive panel of city leaders here, and I'm going to invite you in a minute just to say a proper welcome to them. But what we're going to do first of all is to discuss why is it that leading cities matters for low carbon. The first thing to say, perhaps, is that we know that the net zero path involves both an energy switch and an urban transition. We know that the urban transition is about the reconfiguration of our buildings, our transport, our utilities and our places to make them places that really inspire a transition but get rid of the carbon, and they do that by becoming clean, connected and compact, underpinned by a covenant with citizens that gives us consent. And so each of these city leaders is going to talk from their own perspective about how they're leading this approach to low carbon cities. And you've already heard we have Ben Houchen, the mayor of the Tees Valley. We have Katrin Kranfeldt-Jammeh, the mayor of Malmö. We have Philip Glanville, the mayor of Hackney, and also the chair of the London Council's Environment and Transport Committee. Joana Balsameo, who's the deputy mayor of the city of Cascais in Portugal. And Mark Atherton, who's the director of environment for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Please welcome the panel. Ben, we're going to start with this theme of leadership and what it really requires. So please tell us, what is required to lead a low-carbon transition in the Tees Valley, and how is it shaping up?
I mean, I think if we're trying to lead, you've got to try and put together a package of measures that make it appealing for the private sector to be able to come in and help us decarbonise. Because ultimately, to make it sustainable, we need to make sure that it is part of that transition. Now, Teesside is a place that historically has suffered quite a lot of hardship. Particularly in recent years, it's in effect a traditionally UK decarbonised post-industrial area. And in 2015, we had a very large steelworks closed. And as an area, as a community, we've been used to making things and selling it around the world. I mean, Teesside Steel is in 9 of the 10 tallest buildings in the world. We built the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Gladstone, when he was Prime Minister, said that we were the infant Hercules because we had such manufacturing prowess. Now, a lot of that has gone. So what we have and what we try to do as leaders to be able to repackage and reimagine what the future local economy would be like is we need to look at what are our natural attributes. So we have, in my region, the largest brownfield site in Western Europe. That's a fantastic thing to have, but it is not unique in itself. There are fantastic large sites across the whole of the world. But in UK terms, and certainly European terms, it's the largest. We also have access to the deepest river on the east coast of the United Kingdom. So if we're looking at importing and exporting, particularly in things like offshore wind, that's another fantastic element as well. We also have the UK's first and largest free port. So all of a sudden, what we've tried to do in leadership is look at the attributes that we have that are USPs from a UK perspective, and how do we layer them on top of each other to make it a global opportunity. And as a result, that's why we are, on a UK level, on an industrial side of things, we are leading the way. Because if you need 100 acres of land to build a large-scale hydrogen plant, you would come to Teesside. If you were looking at a large-scale carbon capture and storage facility, which we're actually building with BP and Equinor, a £1.5 billion investment, you would come to Teesside, because all of these things can be co-located, they can feed off each other, they have the land availability, they have access to the rest of the world, and most crucially, those skills that I talked about from old industries are directly applicable to the new, whether it's oil and gas moving into offshore wind, whether it's carbon capture and hydrogen that, to be frank, in Teesside we've been doing for over half a century, just applying those technologies in different ways. What we have to do as leaders is show the rest of the world this is what we've got to offer, this is how we can package it, and this is why it's such a great opportunity for others to be able to come and develop their technologies, grow it, and then ultimately apply it in the real world.
Thank you very much, Ben. So there's a very strong theme here of using what you've got in an intelligent way to get where you want to go. And Katrin, let's pick up with you, get the story from Malmö. So you've been leading this Malmö climate program that I know brings together, on the one hand, city planning, and on the other hand, urban development, really putting the private sector as your primary partner. So Tell us a little bit about the program itself and how you're leading it and how you engage with the private sector.
Thank you. First of all, I could say that Malmö is a fast-growing city, and we are growing on a very small amount of square meters. It's a really dense city, and we have high climate ambitions and have had for several years. We used to be an old industrial city, and the transformation that we have undergone had a strong focus on climate action, and we have developed new city district, completely new city district with all the infrastructure, climate-friendly infrastructure in place from the very beginning. So if you are a developer wanting to take part, then you have to agree on the goals. And we have had several, we are working with the climate contract when we are developing those new city districts to make sure that everyone is engaged, everyone is taking action from the beginning. So we have a long tradition of transforming the city together with all the actors. And I think if we have an ambition goal that with focus on to reduce our emissions with 70% within the whole bigger area. And within our municipality itself, it's like 100% that we are focused on to become a net zero municipality. And we have been working with different networks, with different cities to get the best ideas, to bring it back home, to do it a little bit better, because we have an ambition to be in the very forefront. When it comes to as I said, we are fast growing, and when it comes to the construction and building sector, it stands for approximately 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And we have the last couple of years working together with, today we are about 180 different actors within the sector, working together with a local roadmap with ambition to be climate neutral for the whole sector in 2030 and to become climate positive 2035. So today it's about 100 different actors like constructors, finance institutes, and so on. And then we are working with the already existing areas as well. I told you about new city districts. It's easier to do the right thing from the beginning, but 90% of our problem when it comes to emissions and environmental problem, it's in the already existing part of the city. And now we are working to find new business models to refurb, to do it in a way that not drive the rents, so that normal people with normal wages has to leave the areas. And I think that's a question that mayors all over today are struggling with, to have green ambitions, social ambitions, and to connect them together. So we try to, we are investing heavily in a new public transportation system as well, with BRT buses, for example, and to make sure that we connect to already existing areas in a climate-friendly mobility way as well.
Thank you, Katrin. I mean, it sounds like you're doing four things at the same time. Setting very ambitious targets and making sure they're very clear. Secondly, building a coalition of 100 organizations that are committed to the targets and using planning powers to require them to adopt the same targets. And then you're building the systems underneath it that make it possible to shift to a low carbon mode, for example, with improving public transport. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, more or less?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Phil, let's come to London, if we may. You're obviously leading a very ambitious program in the London Borough of Hackney, but you're also chairing and leading for all 33 London boroughs their environmental and transport program. What kind of collaborative leadership are we seeing from the London boroughs?
Well, Greg, I think there's a lot of localism on stage here of boroughs, cities kind of taking a lead on climate. For those that don't know London, it's quite a disparate set of local government actors. You have the Mayor of London, you have the Greater London Authority, you have the 32 London boroughs, and you have the City of London. And to succeed on the journey to net zero, you've got to work across that platform. And so my role as chair of London Council's Transport and Environment Committee is to represent the boroughs in that voice. And we are a collection of boroughs that most of us declared climate emergencies in 2019. It led to an action plan around 7 climate themes, bringing together borough leadership, so peer-to-peer leadership around planning, around One World Living, around retrofit, which is an award-winning project, to sort of convene the expertise that existed within London's boroughs, and then make sure that then we could work with other actors, whether it's business, civic society, the mayor, the GLA, and obviously the partnership that we're directly a part of is 3CI, which links in London's councils with the core cities in the UK and the rest of the local government family. And I suppose critical for us is seeing that the very local tier is absolutely vital if we're going to get to net zero. Now, we're all different places. We're inner and outer London. We're different political parties. We have different economies. You know, West London, based around Heathrow, has a very different decarbonisation challenge to East London, which is much closer to some of the sort of deindustrialisation and regeneration and change. But I suppose the common theme is seeing that the local is where you have to deliver it, and it will be cheaper, more efficient, more effective if we get that delivery at a local level. And a lot of what I am doing is advocating on behalf of stable funding streams, making sure that all of that innovation and passion that you have at a local level can be truly unlocked. And we don't just do that, though, because we want to hog power in local government. We think that you don't get socially just outcomes, you don't build those local business relationships, you can't create that circular economy if you aren't embedded in the communities that need to go on that journey. So we're constantly checking in with what London business thinks, what London residents think, making those links into civic society to deliver. And I think we've also shown to government that we have a record of delivery where you bring together London's local government, as we have done on EV infrastructure. You can really tap into that expertise at a borough level, but also work with TfL, government funding, work with industry, and really start to deliver the infrastructure that London needs in terms of that transport transition. You've also seen that around active travel. You've started to see it around retrofit. But my big plea, and we might move on to it, is believing in localism, and that you cannot deliver any of the commitments we've made at an international level or national level without those crucial local actors. And we're more ambitious as well. I'd finish on that point. You know, most of us in London have a 2030 net zero target. That's 20 years ahead of UK national government. We think we can get there, but only if we're empowered to do so.
Phil, thank you very much. I mean, there's something brilliant in what you say about the power of the local, but the importance of aggregating at scales above the local, London-wide, 9.5 million people, but also all across the country. And then your point that actually coordinated action is essential for the just transition and for business engagement. If it's uncoordinated, it doesn't work. Very, very helpful. Let's go to Cascais and go to Joanna. Joanna, you're leading a carbon neutrality roadmap for the city of Cascais, and you're doing that by putting together innovative solutions on mobility with also developing a new kind of energy community. So please tell us all about that. How is that happening, and what are you doing as the leader?
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also for having a panel for local authorities. And just like Phil was saying, the power of the local. And we know that 70% of emissions are resulting from cities. And when we're looking worldwide at a huge problem, climate crisis, when you break it down into smaller administrative cells, it seems less daunting, right? And when you look at smaller cells like the ones we represent, you know, when we want to roll up our sleeves and do stuff, and there's a certain agility and proximity to the problems, I think this explains why this panel is necessary. So Cascais is a city outside Lisbon in Portugal, and we have an action plan for climate adaptation and also a neutrality roadmap for mitigation, and that's what I'll focus on. And this roadmap has 4 pillars. One is mobility, energy, forestry and land use, and the other one is waste and water waste treatments. So I'll focus on some of the innovations and also some of the challenges, because it's not just about having, the nice, charming side of this. So on energy, our main challenge is that we can act directly, investing directly on municipal properties, but we are mere enablers and incentivators regarding what is, the private sector, residential, etc. On our stuff, it's also not easy because most of our land is either protected and or it's urban. So we have to decentralize. And decentralizing means having data compiled for every single building. And we were not that organized some years ago. So when we do public tenders, and there's lots of public tenders and they're very cumbersome, this is exhausting. However, we've managed to set up the first energy community in Portugal, and it's inclusive. So there's a big school, it's a charity school, and we've covered the rooftop with PV, and we're giving energy to surrounding households that are from vulnerable households. And that makes us proud. As enablers, what are we doing? We've created a few funds, green funds, for families and for companies to sort of encourage the uptake of energy efficient equipment. What is the innovative side of this? Well, for families, we have positive discrimination for families that are low income. And this means they don't have to put up money upfront, which happens many times with these green funds. So we've managed to find a downward articulation whereby they do not have to put any amount of money upfront for low income families. For mobility, this makes me proud because we're the only city in Europe, I think, that has free public transport. It was really, really difficult to get here, financially wise and also administratively wise, but we're here. And it's had a 20% uptake in public transport. So we have more 20% users and less emissions in NO2 and PM 2.5, etc. We also have the first two public bus transports that are hydrogen-based in Portugal. The innovation factor here was challenging because we had to take one step ahead before this was commercially viable. So we do not have even a pumping station that is for hydrogen. We have a portable device whilst we're launching a public tender for, a more structured pumping station. There's two other challenges. One is governance. So in a municipality, when you want to really launch a policy that is about climate action, you cannot have one single flag bearer. You need a coordinator, and that's the environmental pillar of the organization. But if the flag bearer is here, the other departments will not understand that they're part of the solution. So this was challenging at the beginning, and it entailed a lot of bilateral meetings between me and my colleagues from other areas to demonstrate how they are part of the solution and how they are also flag bearers. Last challenge is monitoring. Monitoring is very difficult because our roadmap proposes measures that are not only depending on our action, they depend on the action of private homeowners and private companies. Keeping track of this is not easy. We're getting there. But the next step is getting closer to another scope, which is how do we measure consumer patterns from our citizens? And how do we also get issues like sustainable public tendering in our own inventory? So these are challenges for the next couple of years that I'd like to share. Thanks.
Great, Joanna, thank you very much. So I think I heard you say something about innovation. You're really moving forward on a completely new way of doing energy and transport. Something about integration, because you're having to bring the whole of the city hall together to do it, but also something about influence. You're trying to influence the behavior of citizens and the behavior of business, and you measure your success by how much change you create there. Fascinating. Thank you very much. Now, Mark, you've been leading a whole series of transitions in Greater Manchester. There's an energy transition going on and an urban transition going on. Tell us all about the energy transition.
So thanks, Greg. I work for the Combined Authority, which brings together 10 local authorities of Greater Manchester with an elected mayor. But also under the devolution deal, we also bring together fire, police, and health. So There's a public sector partnership that's going on that we've built on and tried to deliver a mission-based approach, so working with about 150 organisations across Greater Manchester, in the same way that Qashqai, I think, is. We set out a plan in 2019 to try and be carbon neutral by 2038. So how are we doing? We've set out a really firm foundation. We've made some really good strides. We're doing all of the right things, even through the pandemic. But the truth is, and I suspect other cities on the panel will say the same thing, we really need to innovate if we're going to try and hit those targets. We can get to 2038, and we might be able to meet our carbon budgets. That's incredibly more difficult. But to do that, we have to innovate, the theme of today's session. And I don't just mean technology innovation, but I include that. So I think it's technology innovation, I think it's financial innovation, and I think it's also innovation in how we deliver. And what I'd like to do is just give you one example from each of those. So on the technology innovation side of things, last year we set up an energy innovation agency between public, private, and academic partners. It brings together SSE Energy, Hitachi, Bruntwood, who are a commercial building operator, 3 big universities in Greater Manchester, and then the CA and a growth company. And it really creates an open door to any innovator that wants to help us close the gap between where we are now and where we need to be in our carbon emissions. So they provide business support, entrepreneurial support, risk decarbonisation of risk, looking at how we can support them to develop demonstrators. Obviously, we want the demonstrators in Greater Manchester, but anywhere really, because it's that growth in the technology and making it commercialised quicker that will help us to keep within our budgets. So that's technology innovation. The second is financial innovation. Now, this is a real challenge for everybody here. I think we're the first UK city region to set out local energy plans. And it sounds a little bit boring, but really it's really fascinating, because what it does, it takes all of the data that we have available, whether that's energy efficiency data in buildings, or our ability to be able to generate energy on local authority land or elsewhere, or how we're going to move to electric vehicle charging, or changing our heating systems. And it puts all of that into a melting pot, and it says, well, how are you actually going to deliver this? What's the pathway from where you are now to where you need to be in, for our terms, 2038? So it's the first time that anybody's looking from the street level to the grid level. And it gives us a couple of different advantages. One is that it helps us to prioritize activity, look at how we can prioritize those things which are least regret and least cost. Secondly, it helps us to think through how we're going to fund this. And I'm going to throw out some numbers for you. They're quite scary. So to transition Greater Manchester, it's going to cost us about £64 billion. However, 70% of that would have been under business as usual. So 70% we'd have spent anyway. About 12 billion of that is under local authority influence. So it's our buildings, but it's also heat networks, electric vehicle charging. And again, 70% of that we would have spent anyway. So now what we can do is start to develop strategic outline business cases to understand how we can bring the private sector and investors to support the delivery of that, knowing what the pipeline is. And that's what we need. We need a continual pipeline of projects to give confidence to the market, to give confidence to businesses, to grow and to invest and to be able to deliver this at scale. And my third is a delivery innovation. So we set up a procurement framework called Go Neutral. It's open to all local authorities in the UK. And basically what it tries to do is demystify how you put electric vehicle charging or PV energy generation onto local authority land and buildings. If you're a local authority that doesn't have any money but wants to do it, that framework will do it for you. Do the whole thing, the Rolls Royce. Do everything from design to build to operate to finance. If you just want to be able to get finance, you can do that. And you can do the design, build, operate yourself, and anywhere in between. And it just makes it simple for local authorities they have capacity constraints to be able to get into a framework that's been procured, meets Green Book standards, and allows you to move forward quickly. Now, currently, on Greater Manchester land, we've identified about £97 million worth of investment. We've currently got about 17% of that underway, which it's about £60.5 million. And we've got another pipeline of about the same for the next few years. So there are 3 innovations that I think are good examples.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mark. There's so much in what you've just said. Now, we've had one round of questions from me, And I've got another round of questions that I want to put, but I would like to invite everybody in the room to submit questions via Slido for our team of very esteemed city leaders. You've heard about how leadership is being applied in terms of ambition, in terms of prioritization. You've heard about innovation, you've heard about partnerships, and you've heard a lot about coordination and making that work. So send us your questions, and as soon as we've done the second round, we'll get into those. I'm also going to invite my panelists to do two things. One, could you pass me the iPad, please, because that's where the questions are going to be. And number two, let's try and keep the answers in the second round to about 2 minutes each, so we'll have time for some questions for the audience. So Ben, we're going to come back to you again if we may. And my question is, what's the hardest part of this? The hardest part of getting to a net zero transition in the Tees Valley? And what leadership is required on the difficult stuff?
Given that we tend to very much be a leader in the big industrial end, so it's big gigawatts worth of clean energy, hydrogen production, the decarbonisation of industry, which often is seen as the most difficult to tackle, the biggest problem that we have is coordination and certainty from central government. Because invariably, major investors that we're speaking to, it's great, we can get them there, we can help them understand that landscape that I explained before, but invariably, if you're building a 1 gigawatt gas-fired power plant with the world's first industrial-scale carbon capture and storage facility, which we just happen to be doing in Teesside, you tend to find that actually the biggest problem was the carbon capture and storage process that the government have just run. I mean, that's taken, well, they cancelled it in 2010, so actually it's been going on for 15 years, really, and it's only just got round to the government producing a framework and trying to get into the revenue structures of how you actually do that. So we were ready, we were able to move much, much more quickly. But again, governments have issue with, they have this kind of major problem with not wanting to pick a loser. And so they run competitions, and then they run more competitions, and then they go and vet it even further. And yes, we've got to get value for money for the taxpayer, because ultimately the taxpayer is going to have to put some money into this. But our biggest problem is that, as we've all, I think, echoed on this panel so far, is the locale is much more equipped and much more agile than the centre. And because the centre is trying to apply a model that applies to the whole of say, the UK, then it becomes very, very clunky. So whether it's in hydrogen, I mean, a specific example, for instance, sustainable aviation fuel is obviously something that's quite applicable to a lot of people. You know, aviation talk about this a lot. Aviation isn't going to solve it. It's going to be the chemical and processing sector, because they're going to produce the sustainable aviation fuel or the hydrogen fuel that will go into future planes. The government is still thinking about, for example, a CFD for SAF, or do they have any other financial support? Well, actually, what we've done is just got on with it. So we've brought an American investor in, new technology, and they're going to be building the UK's first SAF plant starting later this year, completely subsidy-free. But actually, there's another investor who's waiting for the government to come out with a CFD and actually slowing down that investment because they're waiting for the government's certainty. So from our point of view, the lack of certainty to the private sector to understand which technologies are regulated, what's the regulation, how do they go about investing, because they all want to invest and the money's there to invest, and also speed of delivery from government with those solutions as well, because it can be very protracted.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. I can't tell you how many heads were nodding. As you said, the problem is lack of certainty resulting from central government not being aligned and ready. We'll come back to that, I'm sure. Catherine, sometimes you have to cooperate with your neighbours, and you heard Phil speak about that in London. But of course, one of your neighbours is in another country, and they're called Copenhagen. So how is the collaboration with Copenhagen going on the climate agenda?
Well, we have been working closely together for several years now. It's two cities with high ambitions when it comes to climate action. And we are working closely together, inspiring each other. I wouldn't say compete, but when it comes to create the best city for bikers, pedestrians, and so on. And we try to work closely together. We are two bigger cities in areas with the surrounding, and we are working to connect all our surrounding municipalities in a greater cooperation. At the moment, we plan, for example, we know that some part of the ambitions means that we have to attract investors to our common region. And we see that the size of Malmö and the size of Copenhagen is stronger when we put our inhabitants and our area on both sides of the national borders together. And that's a way to attract investors, and we would like to send a strong signal to investors that are eager to develop new techniques, innovations, that you can use both our cities as some kind of lab, and we will support it. Today we are planning to connect our cities with, I think that's the first metro system linking two different nations together. So Copenhagen is expanding their tube, and at the moment we are planning a connection to Malmö. We have the bridge and has had the bridge for like 20 years, made a huge difference for our cooperation. But with the metro line, we can make sure that we have lots of more space for trains for freight, for example. So the Swedish government and the Swedish industry can export on more green way out through Europe. So we would like to make more space on the bridge for long way transportation and freight transportation, and make a growing labor market for us. So when we have the metro system in place, we have, I think it's about 1 million more inhabitants in our labor market region, which it means a lot when you would like to attract new ideas and businesses and create good opportunities to have the best from both sides. So we are working really close on specific topics to create better living conditions within our cities and inspire each other. And then we are working to make our governments see that we need some change in legislation and things like that to not hold us back.
So 2 cities in 2 different nations sharing a single metro system, combining your purchasing power, your pulling power to attract investors, but also using the partnership to leverage your national governments, something we might come back to in a minute. Phil, I think that yourself and colleagues, as well as myself, have assessed that there's no way that all of the investment required for net zero can be provided by the public purse, certainly not in a timely way. So what have you learned about what cities can do to lead the engagement with private sector to attract private investment?
I think the first point is where you've just left us, which is recognising that it can't be done alone. Yeah. We need government funding, we need blended finance, we need private investment, and we need to think also about the balance between the end user and their capacity to fund this transition, as I think we've also heard from the panel. Going into COP26, the finance COP, it was London Council's Core Cities, the Connected Places Catapult, saying we want to go there with a proposition that says that we can have a pipeline of projects, a structure to unlock that private funding and matching the ambition of UK's local government. And this is a membership body that includes Glasgow, who's obviously the COP26 host, but those core cities, Belfast, Cardiff, it's a cross UK effort. And thinking about, conferences like this, where you can have an amazing discussion with a potential investor, a technology, a partnership, but when you take those ideas back to your city and municipality, they don't meet procurement thresholds, they face legal obstacles, they get challenge around how can you match that kind of finance, and trying to create that platform, which is what has evolved into 3CI, to mix that pipeline of projects with language and methodology that both business and local government can then access. The challenge and the obstacle is we've developed the business case with BEIS, which is what is now the Department for Net Zero and Energy Security. We've had that seed funding. We've got a Green Book compatible business case. It is the ability to unlock the revenue funding to support the finance that I think is our biggest obstacle. But also the strength of the partnership is working with the Mayor of London, his green finance work, the City of London as well, and wanting to be that green finance capital. In some ways, if we cannot do it in London, with all of that expertise around international finance and banking, the platform of the London boroughs and our citizens, you aren't going to be able to do it anywhere. The final part, I think, is making sure that, especially if we deploy this into neighbourhoods and into homes, that we don't just do the easy investable bits, that we look at a whole neighbourhood. It is quite comparatively easy now to develop EV infrastructure. We've got the models, whether it's Manchester or London, where you can access the private finance, you can do the contracting, you can deliver that infrastructure, the market is there to respond. We're getting there around community energy and PV, but if you're to link that with fabric first retrofit, where it is not so easy to capture the finance and the beneficiary, we need to make sure that we do all of those things and take those revenue streams where we can develop revenue and also apply them into adaptation and mitigation. The last bit I would say is we can't just retrofit those that can afford to pay. So whether we're talking about public housing or private renters or SMEs, there needs to be a finance mechanism that doesn't put all of that burden onto that end user, because we've seen time and times again, certainly in the UK, where we've had national-led schemes that look at types of funding based on energy, on insulation. It captures a very small tier of people that can afford to pay and that are motivated to retrofit. We're not going to get to net zero if we just incrementally expand beyond those that can afford to pay and are very passionate about doing it to their own homes.
Thank you very much, Phil. I mean, there's so much in what you said, but we would like people to look at the Cities Commission for Climate Investment, 3CI. The website tells you all about this. But Phil, you've stressed re-engineering the proposition to make it private finance friendly. You've stressed putting local government services and processes and assets into the mix. And you've focused on cross-subsidizing so that those who can't afford to use market mechanisms actually get support from the wider system. Very, very important. Thank you very much. Joanna, let's go to you. And I know that both Cascais and also Greater Manchester are members of the Urban Transition Mission, as well as you being a member of the recently presented Horizon Europe mission. So what are the main benefits for a city leader of being part of these broader partnerships around climate change?
I think we're hyperactive on what concerns partnerships because we're in 7 Horizon projects, 3 EEA grants, there are Norwegian grants, and 2 LIFE grants. So this has really helped me inside my organization make the case for the climate action pillar of the council. Not that my mayor needed convincing, but when I highlighted, look, we're receiving all this co-financing for this work, and it's such an important EU-wide, European-wide issue. And have you noticed, this is the only sector that brings us revenue and savings because we're saving in energy, etc. So, you know, suddenly I've managed to transform what was a small unit into a whole department, hire a lot of new people. And this seems small, but it's really important. And it's not, of course, the only reason why we're in these partnerships. I'm just referring a collateral positive benefits. The other positive benefits are, of course, co-financing, knowledge sharing, and just feeling that other countries and cities have the same challenges. UTM, the Urban Transition Mission, is our most recent partnership. And I would classify it as multi, because it's multi-stakeholder, multi-level, because it's cities, national authorities, and even multilateral, so the UN is involved, and multi-tool, because it encompasses tools that go from policy to regulation to innovation to technology, academia, and so it's multi. And I mean, just sitting here, I've scribbled down a lot of notes from what you guys have said and what your cities are doing. What I hope from UTM is that we want to go beyond 2050. We don't want to have a carbon neutrality roadmap that goes to 2050. We want to bring it earlier, but we need help. So I see UTM as a vehicle to help us bring us there. And of course, this depends also on what national governments do. In my case, Portugal, it depends on what the EU does, because national authorities have limitations in their remits. So if I want to go further in urban planning or in transportation, I cannot just do it by myself. It's not just about Cascais. And so this is a different challenge and something you've mentioned as well. What happens when national authorities or EU does not take us further or help us go further?
Great. Well, thank you very much. There's something very clear in this about how these multilateral groups deepen the prioritization and the ambition, but also equip you through mutual learning. And I'm sure Mark will talk about this, but I understand that the Urban Transition Mission is now open for other cities to join. We're looking for another 250 cities, and UK cities are eligible to apply. So, Mark, why don't you pick that up? But tell us now about what you're doing in Greater Manchester on the urban side of the transition. What's happening in buildings, transport, logistics, and others?
So I'd like to start with transport if I can, because I think most major cities have two large contributions to your carbon footprint. The two biggest are transport and the way we heat our buildings. It's true in most cities. So tackling those has to become a priority. Can't just look at those, it's got to be across the board. But just in those two areas, we're doing quite a lot around buildings. And I mentioned earlier creating a program of building works. So we've looked at 2,700 public buildings in Greater Manchester. With the support of government finance matched with our own, we've had a go at retrofitting about 10% of that stock, worth about 200 million in the last 18 months. So we are going some to make that happen. In the social landlord space, there are about 250 social homes in Greater Manchester. And my mayor has set up a truly affordable net zero task force to understand how we can rapidly decarbonise those. We've got, working with the social landlord sector, we've recently been successful in getting social housing decarb fund. The real interest there isn't so much the amount of money, it's about getting, in our case, 19 social landlords to work together at scale. Because you create efficiencies in that way. You create knowledge sharing, you create capacity building and capacity sharing. And so whether how the next program will be successful, but actually it's the program after this, where once it's been proven that they can work together and work together well, they will then try and decarbonize the whole of their stock and really take it to scale. And then finally, on the building side of things, we've tried to ensure that the policies that we're adopting and trying to set in advance of national legislation are going to push our sector forward. So we've got a spatial plan, a statutory spatial plan, which has just been through examination in public. If that gets agreed, we'll have all new build be net zero carbon by 2028, which is more substantial than the UK plan. So it's pushing policy, but also creating demand through that. On the transport side, my mayor has a vision to have a London-style transport system. We're envious of what London has, which basically means that you have a tap-on, tap-off for our buses, our trams, eventually it will be our trains, our local trains as well, under the latest devolution deal, but even then into things like bike hire, so that sustainable travel and active travel becomes the easiest way to get people out of their cars. And we need to do this through incentive, because otherwise we will end up penalising those who are less able to make that change. So we've got to incentivise it and make it easy for people to get out of their cars and adopt different forms of transport. And to finish on that, we've put about 108 kilometres of active cycle and walking infrastructure into place already, and about £500 million worth of investment in the pipeline is still to come. So it's about changing the way that people think about how they transport themselves and goods and services across the city region to really drive down carbon emissions from transport, but also how we decarbonise our buildings through really trying to decarbonise heat.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. So changing consumer preferences about how people move and really trying to decarbonise heat, obviously key points. Now, thank you very much, audience. You've sent us 9 questions. What I'm going to do for our distinguished panelists, I'm just going to read all the questions. Then I'm going to invite you to comment on 2 of them each in about 1 minute. So it's going to be quite quick. So one question is about rural areas. Is there anything we can learn from cities about how rural areas decarbonise? Another question is, how can we work better with national governments, given what's already been said on the stage? Are there any success stories in doing that? What about the role of the private sector in helping local authorities to accelerate EV infrastructure? I hope to hear the Hackney case study, Phil. What about, what's your advice to other local authorities in terms of how you unlock affordable financing options for residents and businesses around decarbonisation? And then how can we really unleash the power of financial innovation to get the private building owners to really embrace the upgrades they need during this tricky economic time with the problem of cost of living? And then anybody who would, our questioner would love to hear from city leaders about how we're protecting nature and biodiversity in cities as we approach decarbonisation. So 9 great questions. Thank you for those. The panel will take 2 questions each. Katrin, can we begin with you this time?
Yes. Let me see. I start with the one with biodiversity. I think that's interesting. We have it as a part of our environmental and climate program and strategy as well. And I mean, that means a lot of different things, but we are working hard to make the city greener with green walls, with more trees, and to make sure we have one of the world's most valuable soil around our city. So when we are planning, we are trying to get to spare those as much as possible. And when we take our new city plan, which we're doing at the moment, we have those lines crossing the cities to make sure that we have ways for polluters to transport in the city. So that's we are working quite a lot with that at the moment. The other one, to refurb already existing parts of the city, we are trying to get new business cases. For example, we have in one of our more poorer area, we hadn't had investment for several years there, and we started a partnership with a private landlord, and he started to retrofit with a strong focus on energy savings. And he took part of it together with our Department for Environment. And then he had subsidized land close to the already existing neighborhood, and the possibility to build new apartments to a reduced cost. And then he retrofitted the already existing, and he could use the savings from the energy efficiency to put back the raise of the rents. And then he had a chance to build new apartments, also with the focus on strong focus on both energy savings and social investments, like engaging the citizens already living in the area. And I think he saw that the business in this was like the whole area became more stable. He saw that lots of people decided to stay within his apartments. So he made the most out of it, that he didn't have to put so much money in between the tenants. So we could see that all the area were much more socially stable afterwards. And we also saw that we put some investments into the school in the area and had other invest at the very same time. So we saw a huge difference for different individuals, but also for the already existing area.
Great, Katrin, thank you very much. And there's something brilliant in this, isn't there, that city leaders are learning all over the world, which is to give the private sector permission to do one thing, but to require them to do something else at the same time and make both things work in business terms. Mark, will you take 2 points, please, and keep it crisp?
So I'd like to try and address the question around national and local government. I think climate change is too important an issue to get wrapped up in party politics, if I'm being honest. Speaking as probably the only politician on the panel.
Non-politician on the panel.
Yeah, I, I think the Committee on Climate Change in the UK really has a role here to hold successive governments to account, no matter what their colour. And I think local authorities and national government need to be very clear on what their roles are and make sure that we're working to those roles to the best advantage. And I'll give you some examples of where I think it is working. So Greater Manchester has a devolution deal with government, we're about to sign another one, and that will give us more devolution power, particularly around some of the finance aspects of retrofit and potentially low carbon transition, but also starting to think about how we manage our transport system and taking more accountability and responsibility for that transition ourselves, putting it back into local hands. But some of the things that we want to do have to be really done led from the national level. They have to be led by national policy. And you asked the question earlier around the difference between targets. It does cause a challenge because the UK government target is 2050 is 12 years later than Greater Manchester's. The things that we need government to put in place to stimulate that change aren't coming quickly enough for us.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a toing and froing of how we make that work. So that's my first. It's around how do you do it? Devolution, I think, is one way to do it. MOUs with national organisations like Infrastructure UK or Innovation UK are really good ways to make that formal agreement happen. The second one I'll try and answer is also about the nature area. What I mentioned Go Neutral, where we're looking for local authority land that had capacity for electric vehicle charging and renewable energy. What I didn't say was we also looked at the same stretches of land to see how we could also incorporate biodiversity net gain and how we could bring biodiversity into that mix. Because some of these things are not mutually exclusive. You can do both in the same geographic space. So it's about always being cognizant that as you're moving forward and trying to transition something, whether it's for low carbon or anything else, the biodiversity angle has to be built in right from the beginning. We're looking at to be one of 5 cities that piloted the introduction of local nature recovery strategies last year, and the mayor is signing up to deliver the first formal statutory one this year in 2024. So that's about mapping out and being spatially aware of those areas of biodiversity that we need to really protect. We need to understand how transition is going to happen, whether it's climate change adaptation, biodiversity drift, or looking at how we protect the environmental assets that are already there and build those into our current plans for economic growth, including low carbon transition.
Great, thank you. 2 very, very good answers. And your first answer about national and local and the different ways of doing it, very helpful. Joanna, will you pick up 2 points, please?
Yes, I'll start with biodiversity. So in the urban part of our municipality, there are about 20,000 urban streets. And people love having these trees on their streets, but not in front of their houses. Because then, oh, there's the shade, and oh, the leaves fall in my garden, and then it's such a hassle. And so they asked us, can you please chop down this tree? And we say no. So what we've done in order to create awareness and empathy is we developed a project called iTree, and working again with academia. So for each tree, and even for each street or each neighborhood, we can calculate, and citizens will soon also be able to calculate the ecosystemic value of each tree. So how much shade it provides, the biodiversity it comprises, water filtered, pollutants absorbed. And we've put out some ads on the streets saying, well, did you know that the streets in Cascais are absorbing 16 tons of pollutants per year? And people maybe, they don't think a lot about this, but it creates this kind of empathy and a different relationship with trees. We're restoring our river creeks. There's 7 small rivers flowing north to south in Cascais, and because of bad urban policies before, they're basically covered in cement. This means when there's a lot of rain, the waterfall downstream is tremendous, and the center of our town is always dangerously under risk when there's strong rain. So this means biodiversity gets restored, it means less flooding, it means new green corridors for walking and cycling and just new connections, linking the coast to the mountain and different boroughs in Cascais. It also means saving some houses, because there's a lot of houses in Cascais that are illegal. They were built, it's a long story. And because they're on riverbeds that are prone to flooding, they are illegal and will have to be teared down. However, with the regularization of the riverbeds, it means these houses will be saved and they're first home owners. I'll only answer one question. I just want to bring another subject on board, which is coastline and oceans. So we're regenerating our oceans, we're planting sea forests, and we're implementing artificial reefs. This sequesters CO2, produces oxygen, etc. We're still figuring out what to do regarding our roadmap and this issue. And we're regenerating our national park. We're tearing down the invasive species and putting in the native species and rewilding. So lots of horses and bambis, etc. The challenge here is communication, because sometimes when you tear down a patch of eucalyptus trees, it leaves a really bad eyesore on the landscape. And people are not happy, and I understand, because then the new trees take a long time to grow. So I'm done with, I won't answer the second question because my time is running up. I just want to say, picking up on the beginning of what I said in my first intervention, the power of cities. In Cascais, we'll be hosting the 10th European Urban Resilience Forum in October 2023. So
October 2023. And are you inviting people to come?
yes.
So how many people would like to go to Cascais in October 2023? Could you just send the tickets as a big group, please, John? That would be good. We want to get in one final question in a moment, but first I want to hear a couple of comments from Ben and a couple from Phil. So, Ben.
Yeah, I suppose just quickly on what central government could do better. I think one of the biggest problems that we've seen, because of how prescriptive and the competitive process of some of the funds that are available go through, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I try and give to government is to be more agnostic. So as well as setting targets, rather than setting targets for the means to get to the ends, set where you're trying to get to and be more technology agnostic, as long as those new technologies meet the end goals that you require. At the minute, government's trying to pick winners and losers and being very prescriptive. Actually, we know the private sector is now overtaking government policy, and it's too slow to be able to react. So being more agnostic. And then very quickly on the second one on rural areas, I mean, particularly if you're looking to decarbonise homes, there are a lot of rural areas that aren't on the grid. We have an investment actually in a decarbonised LPG plant from a large American company. And again, it's about how do you facilitate the private sector who are creating these solutions to be regulated in a way that they have the certainty to then be able to go at it, to be able to tackle not just rural decarbonisation or transport or anything else. Because again, it's about taking that end view of outcome and not being overly prescriptive about the means, which is a very, very, very difficult thing for government to do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ben. Phil, 2 points from you.
I'm just going to do EV infrastructure. I said London Council's working with TfL, working with government, good track record of delivering about a third of the EV infrastructure in the country. But if you get down to in each borough level, it's like 100 chargers a year or 100 chargers over 2 years. That is not going to deliver the infrastructure for the sort of transition that we need to see by 2030. So we sort of stepped back as Hackney and said, actually, if we set out to go to market, to contract, we want 3,000 chargers by 2030. We will access government funding, we will access competitive pots, but we want to deliver that whether we get that funding or not. That had the effect of bringing the market to us around not just a partner for the delivery of those, but they could bring their own innovative finance model to deliver it. And instead of having 3,000 by 2030, through our partnership with Zest, we're going to have 3,000 by 2026. And that is a mixture of lamppost, fast and rapid chargers for our geography. It's white labelled with the council. It will be powered on renewable energy. It will be financed by onboarded ethical finance. And it has also the potential to unlock jobs. And if we can deliver local generation, an option for us to have solar panels on our public buildings feeding those very chargers into our streets. So if you go big, if you go to the market with an investable proposition, the market will respond. If we just said we want another 60 chargers, we wouldn't have seen that sort of response and we wouldn't have seen that sort of delivery.
Congratulations, Phil. It's been an absolutely fantastic initiative, and we've written it up as a case study,
You have.
so everyone will see it. You've got 10 seconds each panel. What one single change would enable you to accelerate the transition in your city? Starting with you, Joanna, we'll end with Ben, we go along. One single change, what would it be?
Loads, but I'll highlight one that is a soft policy: communication, communicating internally and communicating externally. This drives literacy and empathy, and this even solves the problem with central government if you do it properly, because it's all about
Communication is the answer. Catherine.
Okay, then I will mention that we have a regional waste to energy plant, provides for about half of Malmö's total heating services. And now we are looking into the possibilities of adding a carbon capture and storage facility. And that this action alone will help us decrease our greenhouse gas emission by 50% compared to 2020.
Yeah, so communication, carbon capture. Mark, what's the one thing that would accelerate you?
I think nationally and maybe even globally, we need to recognize the cost of carbon and the negative externality.
Carbon pricing.
So we need to have carbon pricing.
Carbon pricing. Phil, what's the one that would accelerate you?
I think it's stable funding, but in exchange for an obligation to net zero on local government. It's not the view nationally, but I think if you had an obligation and funding, that would unlock the proper long-term delivery.
Thank you very much. Ben, the last word.
Further devolution.
Right. Further devolution of power. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Ben Huchen, Mark Atherton, Catherine Cranfeld-Yamé, Philip Glanville and Joanna Balsameo. Thank you very much indeed.